What happens when poverty isn't treated as a social issue, but as a national security threat? That's exactly what we just witnessed on Fox News, when Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, was asked a simple, reasonable question. Where will the homeless go once the National Guard clears them out of D.C.? His answer? He has no idea. But the real danger here isn't Hegseth's ignorance. It's what his response reveals. The military is now openly talking about policing America's cities, deciding the fate of its poorest citizens, and reframing poverty itself as a security risk. This is the authoritarian playbook in real time. On Fox News, Pete Hegseth was confronted with the most obvious question anyone could ask about Trump's plan to clear out Washington, D.C.'s homeless population. Where are they supposed to go? Instead of giving even a basic answer, Hegseth shrugged it off. He literally said, "That's not my lane." Think about that for a second. This is the Secretary of Defense we're talking about, a man in charge of the U.S. military, admitting he has no clue, and frankly, no concern, about where tens of thousands of vulnerable Americans will end up. The response is chilling, not just because of its emptiness, but because of what it normalizes. Hegseth is telling us, it's not about solving homelessness, it's about removing it from sight. The military's role here isn't to help people, it's to sweep them away. And the scarier part? He said it casually, as if this was perfectly normal for a defense secretary to weigh in on where America's poor are allowed to exist. In any functioning democracy, homelessness would never land on the Secretary of Defense's desk. It's a civilian issue, meant to be addressed by local governments, housing agencies, social workers, and public health experts. But under Trump's authoritarian-style governance, those lines are being blurred. The Pentagon is suddenly talking about domestic policing, immigration crackdowns, and now even poverty. When Hegseth says, "That's not my lane," he's technically right. It's not his lane. But the more important question is, why is the Secretary of Defense even on Fox News discussing where homeless people will be sent? This isn't about housing solutions or compassion. It's about flexing military muscle on America's streets, treating poverty as a threat to be contained instead of a crisis to be solved. What we're watching is right out of the authoritarian manual. Step 1. Blur the lines between military and civilian authority. Once the public gets used to seeing soldiers involved in social issues, it becomes easier to deploy them for just about anything. Protests? Bring in the troops. Immigration raids? Call the Pentagon. And now, poverty itself is treated as a national security threat. This is how democracies erode. By normalizing military involvement in civilian life, leaders create the conditions where dissent can be crushed, opposition can be silenced, and ordinary struggles, like homelessness, are reframed as dangers to the state. When Pete Hegseth shrugs off the question with, "Not my lane," it's more revealing than it sounds. It shows he doesn't care where the homeless will go, because the mission isn't to solve the problem. The mission is to treat people as security risks, not citizens in need. By putting the Secretary of Defense on television to even comment on homelessness, the government is quietly reframing the entire issue. It's no longer about social services, housing policy, or public health. It's about security. And that shift is deliberate. Once poverty is framed as a threat, the solutions stop being about compassion or reform. Instead, they become about enforcement, surveillance, and control. It's propaganda by job title. When the head of the Pentagon speaks on homelessness, even to say, "Not my lane," the message is clear. This is a military matter. It turns a social crisis into a battlefield issue. That's how you criminalize poverty. You make people believe that tents on sidewalks aren't just signs of economic failure. They're threats to national security. And when you sell fear, authoritarian power only grows stronger. This is exactly how authoritarian regimes expand control. They start small, maybe by clearing out homeless camps under the guise of public order. But once the military is normalized in civilian life, the door swings wide open. Today, it's tents under a bridge. Tomorrow, it's peaceful protests being declared a security risk. After that, it could be political opponents, activists, even journalists being targeted as threats. And the scary part? None of this is hypothetical. Around the world, authoritarians have followed the same playbook. Blur the line between civilian issues and national security until every social problem is treated as a military problem. Americans should be asking themselves a hard question. If poverty is now considered a threat, who will be considered enemies next? What makes this even more alarming is the reaction, or rather, the lack of one. Instead of outrage, we're seeing a collective shrug. Politicians, media figures, even ordinary citizens are treating this as business as usual. But that indifference is exactly what allows authoritarian creep to thrive. When people get used to the military being involved in everyday social issues, they stop questioning it. They stop noticing the danger. It's not just about Pete Hegseth saying, "That's not my lane." The real story is that his lane even touches homelessness at all. By simply being on Fox News discussing this issue, he's helping to reframe poverty as a matter of national defense. And once the public accepts that framing, it becomes easier and easier to justify more drastic actions. That silence, that shrug, it's complicity. There's also something very intentional happening here. What I'd call propaganda by job title. Think about it. The Secretary of Defense, a figure normally associated with war, national security, and foreign threats, is now commenting on homelessness. Even when Hegseth shrugs and says, "That's not really my lane. The damage is already done." His very presence in the conversation sends a message. This isn't a social issue. It's a security issue. That's how authoritarian systems reframe reality. Poverty isn't something to fix with housing programs, education, or healthcare. It's something to control with law enforcement, troops, and force. The language shifts, and suddenly the public stops seeing homeless people as neighbors in need and starts seeing them as potential threats. And that's exactly the kind of mindset that justifies harsher crackdowns, more surveillance, and less compassion. At the end of the day, Pete Hegseth saying, "That's not my lane," might sound dismissive, even harmless. But the truth is, this is far from harmless. It's a flashing red warning sign. When the Secretary of Defense is even involved in conversations about homelessness, we've already crossed into dangerous territory. This is how authoritarian systems slowly take root, by blurring the line between military and civilian life. What starts as the National Guard clearing tents can easily grow into deploying troops against protests, surveilling political opponents, and enforcing ideological control under the excuse of security. And let's be clear, homelessness is not a military issue. It's a social issue. It requires housing, services, compassion, and long-term solutions, not soldiers, tanks, and the Pentagon. By pretending otherwise, this government is not solving poverty. It's criminalizing it. So the next time you hear officials like Hegseth brush off questions with "not my lane," remember, the fact that they're in the lane at all is the real problem. Because once you reframe poverty as a threat, once you make human suffering into a security issue, you're not just ignoring the crisis, you're weaponizing it. And that is exactly how democracy erodes, one blurred line at a time.